Hello and good evening. This is TV7's Israel at War update, and today is the 48th day since the Islamist terror groups from the Hamas-plagued Gaza Strip launched a war in Israel by committing a massacre, murdering over 1,400, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping some 245 individuals, including elderly, women, children, and infants. As we continue to update you from here in Jerusalem, let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, what can you tell us about the latest?
So, you know the old cliche, Jonathan, regarding operas, where it's not over until the fat lady sings, no offense. So apparently it's not over until Yahya Sinwar sings his consent, and the details are not as important as Sinwar's insistence that he will set the rules and the timetable. And as we are speaking now, it does seem as if tomorrow, Saturday, the deal will be implemented. For Hamas, the main focus is not on their prisoners being released from Israeli prisoners, not only theirs, but also Fatah and other organizations and unaffiliated, but rather the ceasefire, the pause that they are gaining in exchange for the captives released. So while these negotiations are going on, the Israeli Chief of General Staff, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, told his division and brigade commanders to ignore all of these news and commentaries and rumors and fight on until being told by High Command to stop. And the High Command, of course, is being directed by the political echelon. And there have been some confusing news out of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, but this is right now secondary to the main idea of trying to launch this deal very soon. At the same time, the Israeli move into South Gaza has been delayed as well, so that the ground forces will not be caught in mid-movement when the ceasefire starts. And the main attention here regarding the fighting is up in the north, where some 50 rockets have been launched by Hezbollah, perhaps as retaliation for the killing of one of their top officials' sons in South Lebanon. But they too are willing and being prepared to stop the exchanges along with Hamas.
2 points. First, of course, tomorrow, Friday, or Saturday, which you remarked earlier. The second point, I think, very important to make, is that words mean nothing when we're talking about the Middle East, and actions are the driving force, and therefore we need to clearly identify how Hezbollah reacts, how do the Houthis react, and the various terror organizations throughout this region, since whatever they say genuinely means nothing. And another point that also, if we should remember, that Shaul Golden, who was killed and then his body held captive by Hamas since a previous operation, unfortunately made the ultimate sacrifice during a so-called humanitarian pause. So there are a lot of challenges to such a pause taking effect, and therefore I'd like to turn to the Israeli commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish, and ask you, when you look at the Gaza Strip, first from an operational perspective, obviously things are ongoing, as also Mr. Oren mentioned, but what is currently being done in order to ensure that if and when such a pause takes place, that the lessons from the past are implemented?
Well, indeed, Jonathan, what we see in the Gaza Strip is human efforts, and I will come in a minute to your direct question, but I think what is important to say that we still see the IDF continuously deepening his hold mainly on the northern part of the Gaza Strip, scanning the area, going door to door, going building to building, making sure that the infrastructure of the Hamas is fully destroyed, revealing a lot of tunnels and posts and command posts and so on. We saw it in the Shifa hospital with the footages that came out yesterday with the tunnel that was directly under the hospital this time without any doubts. And we see the IDF continuously striking in the northern part, this time in Zaytun and Jabalia. The Air Force continuously with his main two missions, striking the Hamas from one hand and close support to the ground forces from the other hand. And as you said, the pause is going to be there. There is no question about it. And I would like to echo first what was mentioned by Amir, that the IDF, and this is the direction of the Chief of Staff of the IDF, is continuously pressing the Hamas. The war from the IDF point of view is not being stopped until it's being set to stop. But then from the other end, of course, there are preparation, and I'm going now to your direct question. And there are preparation for this pause. And one of the risks that this pause is exactly the one that you just mentioned. And of course, this is something that is being taken in consideration. The idea is really to hold the area, as we say it in the military terms. Of course, intelligence would be fully activated within the boundaries of the deal. But the IDF for sure is very aware of all the risks that are part of this deal. And the last thing that I would say, maybe in the macro picture, what we see here is really the tension between the two goals of this war. From one end, the destroying of the Hamas, the infrastructure, and so on, and then from the other end is the release of those hostages. And in some point, we would see that there is a tension between those two goals, and I think that we are in one of those points that we see the tension, and maybe the goal of fighting the Hamas, we would have to hold with it for a while. But I think what is really important to say that the IDF was saying it again and again, and also our cabinet members yesterday, that Israel, the IDF, is determined to achieve the two goals within what is relevant to the Hamas, and of course, the release of the hostages.
Thank you, General Gavish. Let's immediately also add to the conversation retired Brigadier General, or Brigadier General in Reserve, correction, Yossi Kuperwasser, who is formerly a Director General of the Israeli Ministry for Strategic Affairs and head of the IDF Intelligence Directorate's Research and Assessment Division. Thank you for joining us, General. I'd like to ask you about your perspective on this, since I'm personally very keen on hearing it, and mentioning that yesterday we had here the former National Security Advisor of Spain, the CEO of Worldwide Strategy, Dr. Rafael Bardahi, a good friend of yours, who warned that in the event of such a pause taking place, it will be very hard for Israel to restart the war in light of immense international pressure that will, quite frankly, challenge Jerusalem's decision makers.
Yes, first of all, good to be with you. Yes, Rafael is correct. There's been a building pressure on the entire effort of Hamas, of Hezbollah, of the Iranians, of the Houthis, of the militias in Iraq, and of Qatar and Turkey, and of some people in the West as well, is to convince Israel not to continue once the pause is over. And but I think that the logic behind this pause, beyond releasing the hostages themselves, which is of course very important, is to make sure that we have the American support for resuming the fighting after the pause comes to an end. And it may last 4 days, and it may last 10 days. But after 10 days, I believe that the intention of Israel would be to resume the fighting. And by accepting the idea of the pause, Netanyahu was trying to make sure that he has a commitment from President Biden that he would support the resumption of the war, because it's clear that it's necessary to eliminate Hamas in the Gaza Strip. That was the goal, beyond releasing the hostages, and or simultaneously with releasing the hostages. And we cannot stop short of achieving that goal. And we need the American support for that. The rest of the players, okay, nice to have, but unnecessary. And but the United States support is critical. And I think that Netanyahu spent a lot of time speaking with President Biden in the last couple of days, trying to convince him that, trying to get from him a clear commitment that once the pause is over, they are going to support the continuation of the operations of the war that Israel launched against Hamas. It seems that it did it successfully, because I think that the Americans understand simply what it means if they don't. It's such a big achievement to the Iranians, to Hamas, to the extreme fanatic radicals in the Middle East, that is going to serve as an inspiration for radicals all over the world to do the same thing that Hamas did to Israel, because the West is so weak and is not ready to fight. And I think Biden understands it and will support the resumption of the war. There's another issue of whether he's going to support also widening the war against Hezbollah, and I think this is still not agreed upon between Israel and the United States. As goes also to the question of what's going to happen in Gaza once we eliminate Hamas. This is also some open question, and there's some light between what we say and what, especially what Netanyahu says, and what the Americans are saying. From Netanyahu's point of view, bringing back the PA there is out of the question. From the point of view of Biden, he doesn't see a better solution, and he's pushing in this direction, although he understands that it cannot be the same PA. Something has to happen to the PA before it is brought to Gaza. And that's the term he uses in order to explain the change that has to take place, is that it's going to be a revitalized PA. But God knows what revitalized mean.
Thank you, General Kuperwasser. Unfortunately, we'll try and understand it as time progresses. Let's immediately also turn to Brigadier General in Reserve Yaron Rosen, who is a former Israeli Air Force commander, fighter pilot, and the former IDF Chief of Cyber Staff. Thank you for joining us, General. I'm very keen also to hear on your perspective to the southern arena, particularly also the ongoing engagements, also vis-a-vis the southern part of the Palestinian enclave. How are those various complexities at a time when a pause is about to take hold and includes also no overflights over the southern part of the Gaza Strip during the entire period of the pause, according to the arrangement, as well as several hours during the day on the northern part of the enclave? Can the Air Force ensure the safety of the ground forces in such an event?
It's a huge challenge, but again, when during military conflicts, it's never risk-free. But I think the goal is clear to both sides at this point in the campaign that Israel is waging against the Hamas. We have two huge challenges. One is to completely annihilate Hamas, and the second is to free the hostages. And these two things go together, and again, never risk-free. As much as I understand, 7 a.m. tomorrow, a ceasefire, and I'm assuming in the next 12 hours or so, is probably going to be tense, as it usually is when there is a declared time when the ceasefire will come into effect. And from then on, both sides will be very jumpy, let's call it, as to how this ceasefire is being enforced. Remember that communications inside the Gaza Strip, even between the Hamas battalions, is a challenge for the Hamas. So I'm not entirely sure who will be informed and how, and you must always be very careful on the operational level and be in alert. And the Air Force and the ground forces will do their best in order to take care of immediate threats that will be posed on the ground forces. I think that on the strategic level, I think it is very clear that the current context in Israel has changed, and for the whole reason, for the whole region, if you will. I think safeguarding sovereignty of nations in the Middle East has changed. I think that it is very clear that Israel will not accept terror militaries posing immediate threats to their citizens. All the threats that we have seen in the last evolve in the last 20 years or so on our borders, whether direct threats on the borders or missile threats, all of this is out. And all of our way of even analyzing these threats, intent, capabilities, I think we cannot accept this anymore. A terror military cannot be capable of threatening directly citizens on Israel's border, because we are a very small country and people live on the border literally until the last centimeter, if you will. So I think Israel must insist on this strategic and operational depth that we need. In the south, there's a very simple meaning: no Hamas. In the north, the general understanding is going back to 1701, but it doesn't really matter if it's called 1701 or something else. It just means that Israel must insist on its strategic depth. And the last thing may be, I think, important to emphasize is that everything we're seeing here, the multi-layered campaign that we are challenged by, is all centered and directed from Iran. And I think even Qatar is a great example to something the world cannot accept. Qatar playing this dual game, supporting, being a mediator, a wonderful mediator. This has to change after this campaign, just as Saudi Arabia changed after 9/11. Things have to change here. And I think this is something that we will see develop and evolve in the next year or so. This is an ongoing change that Israel and the US need to be very determined with to reach the goal of really changing some of the paradigms that have ruled here, sort of keeping peace, but really not doing that.
Very important remarks indeed, General Rosen. Thank you so much. I think it's also very important to highlight that within the various complexities throughout the region, leadership is required. And unfortunately, at a time when leadership is absent, not only here in Israel, but throughout the Western civilization, there is a thirst amongst the populations in separate countries for leaders to take hold and to realize that the institution is supposed to protect the citizens and not the other way around. But let's turn to Mr. Oren, since we don't have very much time left. I'd like each and every one of you to have a certain theater to focus on. Mr. Oren, let's start with the Northern Theater.
Can I trade the South for the North and someone else will take North?
Go ahead, briefly.
Right. Now, assuming that the ceasefire will hold, because Hamas has an interest in the ceasefire, it was not Israel's wish to have it. It was Hamas and supporters in the West, which the calls that we heard. Now, if this goes on for perhaps 2 weeks, each day 10 or 12 hostages will be released in return for another day of ceasefire. What will happen at the end? We will have the IDF controlling the northern part of Gaza and Hamas, at least in partial control of the south. They will face each other. there will be pressures not to renew fighting. But can the Strip be split even for the interim period until some diplomatic solution is found for the presence of Hamas? Because obviously Israel will not tolerate Hamas being in charge of South Gaza, and therefore something must give. Either Hamas will voluntarily leave Gaza, or Israel will come down and smoke it out.
Thank you, Mr. Oren. General Gavish, I'd like to ask you about the southern arena, particularly Yemen. There's been a couple of launches coming out of there in the last couple of days with interceptions by both the Israeli Air Force as well as CENTCOM in collaboration, of course, with the regional network. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I think this is really something that we discussed it, and we see it again and again. The cooperation that is being held here in our area between CENTCOM in Israel is very impressive. We saw the interception of the drones that were sent by from the Red Sea toward Israel and were intercepted by the U.S. forces. And as you said rightly, the Israeli Air Force also intercepted a kind of a cruise missile that was shot toward Israel. So the first thing is the cooperation itself. It's really unprecedented cooperation. Although we always had a good cooperation, but we could say that this one is really unprecedented, and it's with the time it's only getting, at least on the operational level, it's getting even more and more tight. And the other thing is that Israel is ready for any surprises. Let's put it this way, at least coming from the air. It could be from the northern part, from the Hezbollah. It could be from Syria area. It could be from other areas. We saw the Red Sea. So the Israeli IDF and mainly the Israeli Air Force is looking all around, preparing himself to any option of airstrikes that would come toward Israel.
Thank you, General Gavish. General Kuperwasser, I'd like to ask you to focus on the Iranian question, since that is the head of the octopus. We see ongoing attacks by Iranian proxies against U.S. forces. Just overnight, we saw yet again a strike in Syria in the Al-Hasaka area, as well as additional strikes in Al-Assad air base in Iraq and elsewhere. How is the ongoing effort to curtail those activities at a time when the United States seems prone to only contain rather than actually deal with the root of the problem?
Well, definitely the Iranians are behind all of that, and they are trying to put more and more pressure on the Americans to put pressure on Israel to convince it to stop here and not resume the fighting after the pause. And we have to realize that having the pause is considered by Hamas and its supporters as a big achievement, because they believe that now they have leverage with which they can try to convince Israel to change the goals of the war. And the Iranians are ready to suffer if the Americans are going to retaliate against their proxies. That's not a big deal from an American point of view. They can handle that. And what we are going to see is that if there is a ceasefire, once it comes into effect, then we shall see the end probably of these atrocities. And but they will hover over the Americans and the Israelis for the possibility of resuming the war, and then we shall see an even bigger escalation. We should be promised to have a bigger escalation if the war is resumed. That's something that the Americans and the Israelis will have to take into account, but I think that it's not going to be more than what we have already seen. What worries me about Iran is the fact that while all of that is happening, we see the ongoing progress of the Iranians towards having the capability to produce nuclear weapons. And I'm not going to dig into that right now, but this is another source of concern when we speak about Iran. And everything that's happening can serve as some sort of an incentive for the Iranians to move in this direction. So we have to be very careful.
Of course, the IAEA Board of Governors meeting once again failed to censor the Islamic Republic of Iran over the past 48 hours, and despite the reports indicating its complicity and activities which are of malign nature. Iran has also sent its foreign minister, Hussein Amir to Lebanon to meet with Hassan Nasrallah and therefore General Rosen. What can you tell us about the northern arena? Obviously, the Iranians are the ones coordinating everything. Hassan Nasrallah also met with the leaders of both Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And if you will have another extra 30 seconds just for that, and that is in the cybersphere, there's a lot of attacks happening. Obviously, it's not a quiet time for people of the cyber staff. What can you tell us about that as well?
You know, the saying goes, when the cannons are shooting, cyber matters a bit less. It's not that, you know, cyber defense is not important. When we want to defend Israel, we want to defend Israel and the West writ large. We want to defend it from everything because cyber attacks may disrupt the economy and other realms. So it is important to be engaged in cyber defense, but still, I think it plays a lower role, if you will, in this huge and very high level conflict. Speaking about Lebanon and how Iran is concerting this whole thing, I think what we see is how the IDF and the Israeli strategy being employed in Gaza is projecting to the north. Everything we do in Gaza now is projecting to the whole Middle East, to all of Iran, to Iran's proxies, and of course to Hezbollah, which is the biggest one and most dangerous one. I think that is why Israel must continue. The moment the ceasefire ends and the hostage exchange ends, we need to be very determined, with the United States support, to reach the goal of eliminating Hamas. This is hard, but the determination in this is really key to projecting to the region, and to also being able in the near future to try to design a better security apparatus in the north with Hezbollah, to move them away from the border, to have a regime that will be much more enforced, and enable Israel to safeguard its citizens, and as any nation would do anywhere in the world.
Jonathan, as we wrap up, the word from Qatar is that tomorrow, Friday, 4 p.m., 13 children and women, their mothers, will be released.
Thank you, Mr. Oren. Indeed, I'd like to thank also General Gavish, General Kuperwasser, and General Rosen once more. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. As we continue to update you from here in Jerusalem, we encourage you, time and again, send letters to your representatives wherever you may be. If you're in a democratic society, this will impact decision-making, and therefore we'll continue to encourage you to do so. Until our next updates from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
My name is Yaron. I used to be Deputy National Security Advisor to the Government of Israel, currently Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, a think tank, and the editor of the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune. For the last few years, I've been a regular panelist for TV7, a fantastic opportunity to bring deep and analytical perspectives to the debate over regional affairs, Israeli affairs, international affairs, in the company of some of the best minds in Israel.